I don't know if you guys know this, but I fucking love Godzilla. The Godzilla franchise has given us some of the most entertaining monster movies ever, and with Legendary's recent announcement that the Monsterverse will be getting its own series soon, I knew I had to make this video. So strap yourselves in, folks, because this is going to be a long one, as I rank every Godzilla movie from each era. So up first, we have the Showa era. From 1954's Gojira to 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, this is the era that started it all, giving us some of the series' highs, and some of its extreme lows.
Hey! Come on over here!
Yeah. But other than that, the Showa era is pretty good, so let's rank every Showa movie from worst to best. Starting with the worst movie of the Showa era, we have Godzilla's Revenge. I hate this movie. You probably hate this movie. This is a terrible movie, and not only the worst of the era, but the worst period. Up next, we have Godzilla vs. Hedorah. I swear, the director was on drugs when making this movie, because it is all over the place, with some of the weirdest visuals possible. Oh well, at least Hedorah is cool, unlike Gabara. Moving on, we have Son of Godzilla. Now this movie is definitely a step up from the previous two, but what holds it back is one very teeny tiny little problem. Manila. Manila sucks ass. He looks like Barney's drug addict cousin. Up next we have Godzilla Raids Again, the very first sequel and the very first time Godzilla fights another monster. The only problem is, this movie was extremely rushed, and it really shows in places. But hey, it doesn't have Manila or Gabara, so that's a big plus. And now we move on to Godzilla vs. Gigan. This movie is another stinker, but what puts it above the others is the monster action. It's so much more entertaining in this movie compared to the others. Plus, Gigan is awesome for making Godzilla bleed. Next we have Godzilla vs. Megalon. This movie is when things started to go back in a positive direction for the Godzilla series. People really like this movie, and so do I. And we can all agree that we love Jet Jaguar, and I was happy to see him return in Godzilla Singular Point. Next on the list is Ebra Horror of the Deep. This one is actually another pretty fun movie, although it does have the single worst fight in the franchise between Godzilla and the giant condor. But other than that, I found myself really enjoying it. And now we have Mothra vs. Godzilla. The fourth movie in the franchise, this is a huge fan favourite, and for a good reason. This movie is really good. This is also the first time that Godzilla had a crossover with another of Toho's properties. Moving on, we have Invasion of Astro Monster. This movie is basically a rerun of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, just minus Mothra. Also, some of it takes place in space, which is awesome by the way. We need more Godzilla movies where he's in space. In the next spot, we have Terror of Mechagodzilla. This would be the final film in the Showa era, and it goes out with a bang. It has a good story, good characters, and the monster action is top notch as always. This was a good way to end the Showa era, and I recommend giving it a watch. And now we have the movie that preceded the last, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. This was our first introduction to Mechagodzilla in the series, and the movie does it very effectively. Mechagodzilla is a badass in this, and Godzilla really struggles to take him on. The only complaint I really have with this movie is the King Caesar song, which is way too long. And now for Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. This is the Godzilla equivalent of the Avengers. This movie has one of the best final fights ever, with Godzilla, Mothra and Rodan teaming up to take on King Ghidorah in one massive showdown. This is one of the Godzilla movies I highly recommend you give a watch. We are now into the top 3. And up first we have Destroy All Monsters. If Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster was the first Avengers, then this is Endgame. This was what every Toho Kaiju movie up to this point was building to, the grand finale. Even though it was released before some of the movies I've listed so far, it's actually set after all of them. The rest of the movies are set the year they released. Destroy All Monsters is set in 1999, a very good year might I add. Oh, and when you watch this movie, it's totally worth it for the final fight. In the number 2 spot, we have King Kong vs. Godzilla. And need I say more? The two most famous giant monsters of all time coming together to battle it out to see who is the best. This movie is so much fun to watch. Every time Godzilla and Kong are on screen, you know you're in for a good time. Especially for the final fight, which is easily one of the most entertaining fights in the entire franchise. I highly recommend you give this movie a watch. And finally, in the number 1 spot, we have the original 1954 classic, Gojira. This shouldn't come as any surprise. This movie is without a doubt the best Godzilla movie. It especially stands out because the tone is so different compared to the other films in the franchise. This one is dark, and I mean really dark. It doesn't hold back on showing you the destruction Godzilla causes whenever he's around. I definitely recommend you put this at the top of your Godzilla watch list because it is definitely worth it. And now we move on to the Heisei era. This is considered by many, including myself, to be the best era in the Godzilla series. And when you watch these movies, you'll understand why. They are amazing. So let's get to the ranking. Up first, we have Godzilla vs. Mothra, The Battle for Earth. This is probably the weakest of the Heisei era movies, mostly because it feels like it was supposed to be a Mothra vs. Bactra movie, but Godzilla was thrown in as the main antagonist at the last minute to boost ticket sales for the movie. But criticisms aside, it's actually an okay movie, just not the best of the era. Next up, we have Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Again, not the strongest of the Heisei era movies, but a good one nonetheless. There's not really much to say about this movie as it's kinda just filler until we get to Godzilla vs. Destroyer. But I actually quite enjoy it, and Space Godzilla is a monster that can be used very effectively if done right. Unfortunately, he suffers from a problem that the Heisei era encounters a lot. His costume isn't very maneuverable, but other than that, I suggest giving it a watch. Next, we have The Return of Godzilla, the first movie in the Heisei era. This movie is actually a direct sequel to the original, and it's a really good movie. It does its best to keep the dark, serious tone of the original by making Godzilla the main villain and not having him fight any other monsters. And it does a good job of it, and sets up the rest of the movies nicely. Moving on, we have Godzilla vs. Biollante. This is a really fun movie that has found a cult following as the years went on since its release. It has an amazing theme song in BioWars, and Biollante is easily the best prop that has ever been made for any Godzilla movie. It's a shame we haven't seen her in any movies since, but we're still holding out for the day when she makes her long-awaited return to the big screen. And now we have Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, and this is a good one. This is a really good one. This was the first Heisei era movie I ever saw, and I was hooked immediately. That's why I gave it the number 3 spot in the rankings. And once again, Mechagodzilla is a badass, with even more weapons to blast Godzilla with this time. It's unfortunate that he doesn't really look as intimidating as other incarnations, but hey, he's not a city, so who cares? In second place, we have Godzilla vs. Destroyer. This was the final movie in the Heisei era, and was originally intended to be the final Godzilla movie, but we know why that didn't last. This is an amazing movie, and a surprisingly emotional one too. Probably the most emotional one since Terror of Mechagodzilla. And if you've seen the movie, you know why. I strongly recommend this movie, and whenever you get the chance, give it a watch. You won't be disappointed. And finally, we have the best movie in the Heisei era, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This is not only the best in the era, but one of the best overall. Everyone who has seen this movie loves it, including me. It was good to finally see Godzilla and King Ghidorah get a proper one-on-one fight, as up to this point they'd all been team-ups. Also, I won't go into the logic of the time travel, or we'll be here all day. Besides, there are much better people for explaining it than me. So to conclude the era, I highly recommend you watch this movie because it is a ton of fun. And now we move on to the Millennium era. This was the era when Godzilla was revived once more out of retaliation because of the awful 1998 movie, which I'll be counting in this era as it is responsible for it even existing in the first place. So with that being said, let's begin. So our first entry is pretty obviously the 1998 Godzilla movie. Like I said, I was counting this as part of the era because it was responsible for it existing. That's why it's right down at the bottom. This is one of the biggest insults to any fictional character that has ever existed. There were so many things wrong with this movie that I'd have to make a separate video just to list them all. Next we have Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. This isn't necessarily a bad film, it's just that compared to the other Millennium era movies, it's just kinda there. It has no real impact on the era. It's not even a sequel to Godzilla 2000 like you'd think, considering they used the exact same costume with a few tweaks. Oh well, not a bad movie, but not missing too much if you don't see it right away. Moving on, we have Godzilla 2000. This was the first movie in the Millennium era, and boy is it a step up from what happened 1 year prior. This movie was made specifically because of what TriStar had done with Godzilla, and it is a million times better than that movie. While it's not the best of the Millennium era, it is a nice breath of fresh air after watching the 98 movie, and that's all it needs to be. Next up, we have Godzilla Tokyo SOS. This is the sequel to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, and is a pretty good sequel, and has easily my favourite Mechagodzilla entrance. That is awesome. I do have one complaint about this movie though. Its characters. In Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, we got one of the best female characters in a Godzilla movie. But in this one, she's sent off for training and we're left with a completely different cast. Other than that though, I like this movie, and I think you guys should give it a watch. And in third place, we have Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. And like I said earlier, this movie has one of the best female characters in Akane Yashiro. I also love the idea of having Mechagodzilla built over the bones of the original Godzilla. This is a really good movie, and I highly recommend you check it out. It has a great story, great characters, great acting, and great action. And in second place we have Godzilla Final Wars. And remember earlier when I said Ghidorah the three-headed monster was the Avengers, and Destroy All Monsters was Endgame? Well, this is Infinity War, and Godzilla is Thanos. This movie only has about 5 seconds of downtime, because the rest of the movie is non-stop action. You've got humans fighting, monsters fighting, everybody is fighting in this one. And Godzilla is in the middle of it all, just plowing through all the monsters like they're nothing. If you wanted to just sit down and have a good time watching a Godzilla movie, this is the one you need to be watching. It is pure mayhem from start to finish, and I love it. And finally, we have the best movie of the Millennium era. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out attack. This is my favourite Godzilla movie of all time. Gojira is the best one, don't get me wrong, but this is my favourite. Godzilla feels truly terrifying in this one. He is just made of pure hatred, anger, and evil. Even the blank white eyes give you the impression that this Godzilla has no soul. He doesn't care who you are or what you do. He's going to kill you either way. Godzilla hates everyone in this movie. Baragon, hate him. Mothra, hate her. Ghidorah, hate him. Injured girls in hospital beds, fuck them especially. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. I've pretty much described the movie completely, and I recommend that you watch it as soon as possible. And finally, we have the Reiwa / Monsterverse era. I combined these eras because there's very few movies between them, and as all of the movies have come out around the same time, they're pretty much the one era. With that being said, let's rank the movies. Up first we have Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. This is easily the worst movie in the Netflix trilogy. It's slow, boring, and we all know the other huge problem with this movie. It was advertised as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but that's not what we got. We got Godzilla versus a city instead. A fucking city! That is not Mechagodzilla. This is Mechagodzilla. You're not missing much if you don't watch this movie. Up next, we have Godzilla the Planet Eater. And is it just me, or is the title a little misleading? Because when you say it out loud, it sounds like Godzilla himself is the Planet Eater. But you know that Ghidorah is the Planet Eater. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Also, it doesn't even feel like this is King Ghidorah. He looks more like Space Noodle Manda. It's not as big of an insulting change as Mechagodzilla, but still not really Ghidorah. The movie had a pretty satisfying payoff for the trilogy, but it definitely could have been better. And now we have Godzilla Planet of the Monsters. Once again false advertising, as the trilogy promised the return of many fan favourite kaiju. But by the time the main plot of the movie comes around, they're already dead, and it's just Godzilla and the Servum that are left. Still, this is the best of the anime trilogy, as it provides a nice setup for the rest. It's just a shame that it wasn't the perfect movie we thought we were getting. Other than that, give it a watch and decide for yourself if you enjoy it or not. Next, we have Godzilla from 2014. This was a nice reboot to the franchise, and a nice middle finger to the 98 movie. Godzilla is awesome in this, with one of his best entrances ever. The only problems with this movie are Godzilla doesn't get nearly enough screen time, it's too dark most of the time, and I really don't care about Ford Brody or his family. Joe Brody, on the other hand, is fantastic. Bryan Cranston gives easily the best performance in the Monsterverse in this movie, and I can't wrap this up without mentioning the cinematography. This movie is beautiful to look at. The camera angles are spectacular, and let's not forget the Halo jump scene. While it's not the best movie in the Monsterverse, it's a good start, and I definitely recommend it. Moving into the top 3, up first we have Shin Godzilla. Now I know there are some people who are going to say it should be in first, and it would be, if King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong didn't exist. So unfortunately that knocks it down to 3rd place. This is still a really good movie, and probably the best Japanese one since GMK. The only problem is, the movie is so slow. Even Godzilla moves at a snail's pace. And I know that's the whole point of the movie, that the underlying message is about how the Japanese government were too slow to react to the 2011 tsunami and Fukushima reactor meltdown. But it does mess with your attention span a bit too much. When Godzilla is on screen though, your attention comes right back. And as I said at the start, this was almost number 1, and you'll know why when you watch it. Moving on to our number 2 spot, we have Godzilla vs. Kong. Now this is another movie that was strongly in the running for the top spot, but what loses it some points is the plot holes. There are a few of them. The biggest one being Ren Serizawa. If you were a casual fan just watching this, you'd have no clue who he was, and you definitely wouldn't know that he was Dr. Serizawa's son. But other than that, I fucking love this movie. This movie saved cinema in 2021, bringing in $467.8 million at the box office. This movie is one of the examples of watch for the monsters, not the humans, because they're the real stars. Plus, Big Monkey Punch Big Lizard. And not to mention finally getting a clear winner in the King Kong and Godzilla rivalry. If you haven't seen this movie yet for whatever reason, I beg you to watch it now. You won't be disappointed. And finally, at number 1, we have Godzilla King of the Monsters. This movie is amazing. It's my favourite in the Monsterverse. It's like the director sat down and said, let's just bring the fans back to the Showa era. We've got Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. And just like Godzilla vs. Kong, it gives more attention to the monsters than it does to the humans, the way G-fans like it. And of course, we have to mention Bear McCreary's rendition of the classic Godzilla theme. It is badass, and I expected nothing less from a guy whose name is Bear. This is easily the best movie of the era, and I recommend you watch it as soon as possible. And that brings us to the end of our ranking video. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching, because I had a lot of fun putting this together. Oh, and if you're wondering about the game clips in the background, I was going to use clips from the different movies, but I don't have them all on DVD, and good quality clips on YouTube can be hard to find sometimes. And let me know if you guys like having the game footage in the background. Should I do it for more videos like this one? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos, and with that, I'll leave you with a quick recap of the ranking.